It started in a packed training space where everyone was already on edge. Cameras were out. Phones were recording. People were waiting for something to happen. In the middle of the room stood Steven. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just there, calm, hands relaxed, posture straight, eyes steady. Across the floor, a younger man began circling. He had the look of someone who built his reputation online. Loud voice, big gestures, smiling for the crowd, more than focusing on the moment. He kept repeating how he'd handled real fights before, how he wasn't scared of legends, how today was going to be different. At first, it felt like harmless talk. Then he said Steven's name directly, not with respect, not as a student, but as a challenge. The room shifted. Some people laughed nervously. Others stepped back slightly, giving space without even realizing they were doing it. The challenger moved closer. "You think all that still works?" he said, gesturing loosely. "Let's see it." Steven didn't react. No eye roll. No smirk. No trash talk. He just looked at him. That look wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It was measured, like someone assessing distance, timing, and intent all at once. The challenger mistook that stillness for hesitation. He raised his voice again, louder this time, playing to the crowd. "Or is it just stories?" That line got a few reactions from the audience. A couple of nervous laughs. Someone whispered, "This might get serious." Steven finally shifted his weight slightly. That was it. Not aggressive. Not defensive, just ready. And in that tiny adjustment, the energy in the room changed completely. Because anyone who understood combat, even a little, could see it. This wasn't about hype anymore. This wasn't about reputation. It was about to become real, and the man who came in trying to create a moment had no idea he had just stepped into one. The challenger kept talking, not because he needed to, but because he wanted everyone watching to believe him. He rolled his shoulders, cracked his neck, bounced lightly on his feet like he was about to enter a ring. Every movement felt rehearsed. Every word felt designed for the cameras. "I've been in real fights," he said loudly. "Not dojo stuff, real street." A few people nodded. A few pulled out their phones higher. He pointed at Steven again. "Legends don't scare me." But here's what stood out. He wasn't looking at Steven when he said it. He was looking at the crowd. He wanted reactions. He wanted validation. He wanted noise. Steven gave him none. No reply. No challenge back. No correction. Just calm breathing and steady eyes. That silence started doing something strange to the room. At first, the challenger fed off the attention. He paced left, then right, throwing light shadow punches into the air. He exaggerated his movements, trying to show speed. "Let's see if you can handle pressure," he said. But the more he talked, the more obvious it became. He was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. His laughter was a little too sharp. His smile stayed a little too long. His gestures were bigger than necessary. Real confidence doesn't usually perform. It doesn't need an audience. Steven shifted slightly again, not forward, not backward. Just centered, balanced. That small movement said more than a speech ever could. The challenger stepped closer, invading space. Close enough now that the air between them felt tight. "You gonna move or what?" he asked. Steven blinked slowly. Still calm. Still steady. No flinch. No tightening jaw. No visible irritation. That's when something subtle happened. The challenger's voice went up half a notch. It wasn't obvious unless you were paying attention. But it was there, because silence can be uncomfortable when you're expecting a reaction, and Steven wasn't giving him anything to push against. The crowd started whispering. Some people stopped smiling. They could feel it now. This wasn't playful energy anymore. This was ego trying to force a moment. The challenger tapped his own chest. "Don't freeze now," he said. "You've got a reputation to protect." But Steven didn't look frozen. He looked patient. patient in a way that suggested he had nothing to prove. The challenger mistook that patience for weakness. That's what fake confidence often does. It assumes calm means fear. It assumes silence means doubt. It assumes stillness means hesitation. And in that assumption, it creates its own blind spot. The challenger took one more step forward. Now there was no buffer, no social space, no room for jokes. The noise in the room dropped. And for the first time since he started talking, the challenger stopped smiling. Because now he wasn't performing for the crowd anymore. Now he was standing in front of someone who wasn't reacting. And sometimes, that's the most unsettling thing of all. By now, the energy in the room had shifted completely. What started as loud bravado was turning into something heavier. The challenger was close, too close. His voice wasn't playful anymore. It carried irritation now, the kind that comes when someone doesn't get the reaction they expected. "Why are you just standing there?" he said, louder than before. "You don't move like the videos." A few people exchanged glances. This wasn't smart. One of the older men near the wall stepped forward slightly, not aggressively, just enough to signal caution. "Hey," he said calmly. "That's enough. Keep it respectful." The challenger waved him off. "I'm just testing him," he replied. "Isn't that what this is about?" But it wasn't a test anymore. It was ego pushing for validation. Steven finally spoke. His voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. "You don't have to do this," he said. That was it. No insult, no threat, no dramatic speech. Just a simple statement. But the tone carried weight. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't emotional. It sounded like someone giving a final chance to step away. The challenger smirked. "Oh, I'm doing it." He leaned in slightly, chin lifted, trying to look dominant. "You think I'm scared?" Steven didn't blink. "This isn't about fear," he replied evenly. "It's about control." That word hung in the air. Control. Not strength, not power, not dominance control. The challenger laughed again, but this time it was forced. "Control? You're not even moving." Steven adjusted his stance just a fraction. Feet planted, shoulders relaxed, hands open. Anyone who understood balance could see it immediately. He wasn't frozen. He was ready. There's a difference. The challenger misread it again. He mistook composure for passivity. "You're all stories," he said. "Nothing more." The room went quiet. Even the people recording stopped whispering, because now it wasn't about a playful challenge. It was about disrespect crossing a line. Steven's eyes didn't change, but something else did. His posture became precise, not tense, precise. Every movement economical, every breath steady. He spoke again, just as calm. "If you step forward again, you're choosing what happens next. Still no threat, just clarity." The challenger shook his head. "You're not going to do anything." And that's where the warning ended. Not because Steven raised his voice, not because he got angry, but because the challenger stopped listening. There's a moment in situations like this where pride blocks judgment, where backing down feels worse than risking embarrassment. And the challenger had already committed to the performance. He had an audience. He had momentum. And he had convinced himself that silence meant weakness. He rolled his shoulders again, trying to re-energize himself. "You don't scare me," he said one last time. Steven didn't respond. He didn't need to, because the warning had already been given. Clear, direct, final. The room felt it. The air tightened. The older man near. The wall took another small step back. People instinctively widened the circle. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood. The next move wouldn't be verbal, and when someone ignores a calm warning from a controlled man, the lesson usually doesn't come in words. There's always a moment before something changes. It's small, almost invisible. A shift in weight, a change in breathing, a silence that feels heavier than it should. That moment arrived. The challenger exhaled sharply and stepped forward again. Not fast, not technical. just a push meant to force a reaction. His hand came out, reaching toward Steven's chest like he wanted to shove him backward in front of everyone. It wasn't clean. It wasn't disciplined. It was emotional. And that was the mistake. Before the hand could land with any force, Steven moved. Not backward, not sideways in panic. Forward, just enough. One step. His body turned slightly, changing the angle. The challenger's arm no longer lined up with its target. What looked like a confident shove suddenly lost structure. Steven didn't grab wildly. He redirected. A small adjustment at the wrist, a subtle rotation at the shoulder, a shift in balance. At the hips. Nothing dramatic. But the effect was immediate. The challenger's forward momentum had nowhere to go. His feet were still moving, but his upper body was no longer aligned. His posture collapsed under its own speed. The room gasped, not because it was violent, but because it was precise. In less than a second, the challenger wasn't driving the moment anymore. He was reacting to it. Steven stepped slightly to the side, maintaining contact just long enough to control direction. The challenger stumbled forward, forced to catch himself before hitting the floor. No strike, no unnecessary force, just control. The challenger tried to recover quickly, pretending it was nothing. He spun back around, frustration flashing across his face. He swung again, faster this time, still emotional, still wide. Steven adjusted again, minimal movement, maximum efficiency. He guided the arm past him and applied pressure in a way that made the challenger freeze instantly. Not from pain, from realization. His balance was gone. His center wasn't his anymore. One more subtle shift, and the challenger found himself lowered to the ground, not slammed, not thrown violently, just placed there with firm precision, the entire exchange lasted seconds, but in that short window everything changed. The loud voice disappeared, the performance stopped. There was no more pacing, no more gestures, just heavy breathing and a stunned expression. Steven stepped back immediately. He didn't stand over him. He didn't gloat. He simply released control and created space. The challenger sat there for a moment, processing what had just happened. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't cinematic. It was controlled. That's what made it undeniable. You can fake speed. You can fake aggression. You can fake confidence. It's much harder to fake control. The crowd stayed, silent. Not because they were shocked by violence, but because they had just witnessed the difference between noise and skill. The challenger slowly stood up. His movements were cautious now, measured. He didn't rush forward again. He didn't talk. For the first time since he walked into the circle, he looked uncertain. Steven adjusted his jacket slightly and reset his stance, relaxed again, as if nothing significant had happened. No raised heartbeat, no visible tension, just calm. The older man near the wall gave a slow nod. He had seen this before. Moments where ego runs into experience. Moments where volume meets structure. The challenger glanced around the room. The same people who had been smiling minutes earlier were now watching quietly, not mocking, not cheering, just observing, and that silence said more than applause ever could. Steven spoke once more. "You're done." Not harsh, not humiliating. Final. The challenger hesitated, then stepped back fully. The circle widened again, but it felt different now. The energy that had been loud and chaotic was replaced with something steady. Respect doesn't always arrive through domination. Sometimes it arrives through restraint. And in that shift, in those few seconds of movement, the performance ended. Reality took its place. The moment the challenger realized he was no longer in control came almost instantly. 1 second, he was the loudest voice in the room, strutting and flexing, feeding off the crowd's attention. The next, his movements betrayed uncertainty. His shoulders, once squared with arrogance, slumped slightly. His chin, once high, dipped as if gravity suddenly weighed heavier than before. He tried to regain composure, forcing a grin, forcing a laugh, but it was brittle, cracked. It didn't reach his eyes. There was no humor in it. Only the raw awareness that he had misjudged the man in front of him. Someone whose quiet authority didn't need validation. Someone whose calm wasn't ignorance, but mastery. Steven had not thrown a single punch in the way movies portray fights. He hadn't made a show of speed or strength. He had simply applied precision, timing, and subtle adjustments. And in that precision, the challenger's entire facade crumbled. The room, once buzzing with whispers and laughter, fell silent. Cameras recorded everything, but even the lens could not capture the shift in energy that had just occurred. Every person in the circle felt it. The air was heavy with realization, loud words, aggressive posturing, and clout could not substitute for skill or awareness. The challenger tried to step forward again almost instinctively, but hesitation had replaced his confidence. His body tensed, unsure where to put his weight. His hands twitched, searching for leverage that wasn't there. He had miscalculated the difference between performance and substance, and now it was too late. Steven's expression remained unchanged. Calm, focused, detached. Not cold, but controlled. His stance relaxed again, neutral, as though he had merely guided the challenger to understand something fundamental. Ego is fragile when measured against experience. The challenger opened his mouth to speak, to claim he was fine, to assert that he wasn't scared, but no words came out. His voice faltered. Every syllable that might have salvaged his image evaporated under the weight of his realization. Pride, once his armor, now felt like chains. Sweat started forming along his hairline, not from physical exertion but from panic. The crowd could sense it. They didn't need to see a punch land to understand that the loudest man in the room had been exposed. The look in his eyes betrayed the instant regret that washed over him. He had challenged someone far beyond what he could handle. Steven stepped, slightly to the side, maintaining distance but signaling subtly that he was finished. There was no gloating, no intimidation beyond what had already happened. That restraint amplified the lesson. The challenger wasn't bruised. He wasn't humiliated through theatrics. He simply understood, viscerally, that his actions had consequences, beyond performance. The crowd remained silent, captivated by the demonstration of quiet authority. People who had arrived expecting chaos now understood the difference between someone who wants attention and someone who commands presence. The challenger's every exaggerated gesture had been stripped of meaning. Each step forward now seemed calculated to escape further embarrassment rather than assert dominance. Even the minor missteps he had made seconds earlier, a misplaced foot, an overextended arm, a flinch in posture, now loomed large in his awareness. He replayed them mentally, one by one, understanding that what he had tried to present as skill had been dismantled without aggression, almost effortlessly. Steven's final action was subtle. He turned, walking away with the same calm that had defined him from the start. Not dismissive, not mocking, just neutral. That simple act made the challenger fully aware of the gap between them. His opportunity to redeem himself had vanished in silence. The challenger's peers, who had once cheered him on, now avoided his gaze. No one spoke, no one laughed. The room wasn't filled with mockery, but with acknowledgement. The challenger had misread the situation entirely. His instant regret wasn't manufactured. It was unmistakably real. For the first time, he saw clearly that confidence and posturing could never replace experience and composure. Every move he had made to assert himself now seemed immature, unnecessary, and reckless. He understood in that quiet, watching Steven walk away, that he had challenged a master, and mastery doesn't announce itself. It proves itself. And in those moments, regret solidified into understanding. You cannot fake control, and you cannot bluff against someone who already possesses it. The challenger's pride was bruised. His loud words had failed. His energy, once dominating, was neutralized. He had learned a lesson in seconds that would stay with him far longer than any applause or social media clout ever could. The room exhaled collectively, the tension easing just slightly. But the lesson lingered in the air. Instant regret had done more than silence a braggart. It had shifted perception. It had shown the audience, everyone present, what real authority looks like and why some challenges are better left unmade. The room settled slowly after the confrontation. The noise of earlier chatter and laughter had been replaced by a tense, quiet awareness. People shifted their weight from foot to foot, trying to process what had just occurred. Phones were still recording, but even the cameras seemed secondary. No one needed proof of what they had witnessed. They had felt it in the room, in the air, in the way energy had changed. The challenger sat on the edge of the circle, shoulders slumped. His eyes darted to Steven occasionally, a mixture of caution, curiosity, and embarrassment. Every twitch of Steven's hand, every calm blink reminded him that he had miscalculated the moment entirely. He wasn't hurt physically, but the understanding of his own overconfidence pressed down harder than any strike could. Steven didn't approach him. He didn't offer harsh words or a lecture. His presence alone carried authority. It was silent, but unmistakable. That's what made the lesson lasting. It didn't humiliate, it clarified. It showed what happens when noise and ego meet experience and control. The others in the room, who had gathered for entertainment or curiosity, began to murmur softly among themselves, not gossiping, not mocking, just reflecting. They spoke in hushed tones about the difference between spectacle and skill, about how someone who appears passive can actually hold the entire moment in their hands. Observers noted the small details, the subtleties of stance, the calm in the eyes, the minimal adjustments that redirected momentum without aggression. Meanwhile, the challenger tried to rise, shake it off, and reclaim some dignity, but the energy in the room had shifted so completely that he was now aware of something he hadn't considered before. Perception matters, and once it changes, you can't simply reclaim it. Every previous move of arrogance now looked awkward. Every boast now hollow. Steven stepped lightly to the side, checking the space around him without drawing attention. He adjusted his jacket, a simple motion that carried a subtle finality, a silent signal that the moment was over. The audience didn't applaud or cheer. They didn't need to. The effect was permanent. The challenger had learned without words, and the room had witnessed authority in its purest form. People began to disperse slowly, conversation starting to return but quieter than before. Everyone was processing what they had seen. A few whispered to one another about how quickly ego can be exposed, how patience and precision can outweigh speed and noise, and how some lessons don't require drama to be unforgettable. The challenger stayed for a moment longer, sitting still, trying to recover some composure. Every glance at Steven reminded him that he had misread everything. Pride, once inflated, now felt fragile. He understood that confidence without skill is temporary, and that attempting to provoke someone who doesn't react in expected ways can backfire instantly. Steven's calm presence remained a grounding force. He didn't boast. He didn't lecture. He simply embodied control, and that made it impossible for the challenger to save face. He knew the lesson would follow him far longer than the applause, laughter, or social media clips ever could. The silence carried into the hallways. Others who had gathered at a distance had already left, but they would remember the difference between someone performing for attention and someone who commands presence naturally. It wasn't about fear. It wasn't about violence. It was about clarity, timing, and mastery. For the challenger, regret settled like a weight. He replayed each movement, each word, each attempt to assert dominance, and realized it hadn't worked. Not because he lacked energy or aggression, but because he had misread the environment and the person he tried to challenge. Steven finally spoke softly, not to the challenger, but to the room. "It's done," he said. Nothing more was needed. That one phrase marked the end. The challenger now knew. He had faced someone who didn't react the way he expected, and that single truth left a lasting impact. The room emptied gradually, leaving only the challenger and Steven. The rest gave space, understanding that some moments are personal lessons disguised as public displays. The challenger's shoulders were heavy. The realization had settled fully in his mind. The after effects lingered. Observers talked about it for days. The challenger reflected on it for weeks. And Steven, he moved on as if nothing had happened. Calm and unshaken, proving that authority doesn't need drama to leave a mark. Have you ever seen someone realize too late they picked the wrong person to test? The room had returned to a quieter rhythm, but the atmosphere remained charged. Not with tension, not with fear, but with understanding. Everyone who had been present, from bystanders to the challenger, could feel the unspoken rule that had just been established. Respect doesn't need volume to exist. The challenger, still on edge, tried to mask his discomfort with a stiff posture and forced gestures. He spoke occasionally, attempting to reclaim a shred of authority, but each word came out hollow. The energy he had relied on, loud, brash, performative, no longer held power in this space. It had been replaced by a subtle but undeniable presence that didn't shout to demand acknowledgement. Steven remained calm, his body language relaxed, shoulders square but not rigid, hands open but ready. He didn't move unnecessarily. Every motion, every adjustment was economical, measured, and deliberate. There was no display for the crowd, no exaggeration, no self-conscious performance. Yet, in that stillness, he communicated more authority than anyone else in the room had attempted with noise, gestures, or bravado. Those who had witnessed the interaction noticed it immediately. Whispers started to ripple through the observers. The difference between loudness and mastery, between ego and control. They realized that respect is earned through consistency, composure, and precision, not through shouting or theatrics. It was an education in subtlety, delivered without a single word of instruction. The challenger's attempts to recover were futile. He made a move forward, trying again to dominate the space, but it lacked intention. His confidence had been undermined, replaced by hesitation and second-guessing. Steven didn't need to intervene. His mere presence was enough to signal that the rules of this encounter had shifted. Control, not noise, now dictated the space. Observers, who had doubted the initial calmness, began to understand its significance. Every twitch, every careful adjustment Steven made carried weight. His restraint spoke volumes. It signaled that power isn't measured by aggression or display, but by the ability to remain effective while calm. That quiet command created an aura of inevitability that was impossible to argue against. Even the challenger's peers who had cheered him on found themselves holding their breath. They weren't afraid. They were attentive. They recognized that true authority didn't need an audience. It didn't need approval, and it certainly didn't need to prove itself through noise. They had watched someone dismantle a performance without theatrics, using skill, timing, and presence alone. Steven's eyes scanned the room briefly, acknowledging the observers without arrogance. He didn't need to boast or gesture. His movements remained precise, his stance relaxed, and his tone measured if he spoke at all. That combination, calm demeanor paired with undeniable control, had redefined how the room perceived authority. The challenger finally slumped, awareness fully dawning. His performance, once loud and seemingly powerful, had no effect against someone whose confidence came from competence rather than spectacle. The realization settled like a weight he couldn't shrug off. Respect, he understood now, isn't loud. It isn't shouted. It isn't performed for approval. It is quiet. It is measured. And it is earned through presence and skill. The rest of the observers began to leave, whispering about what they had just witnessed. They hadn't seen a fight. They hadn't seen a public humiliation. They had seen a master at work, someone who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention, someone whose calm presence instantly shifted perception. For everyone in the room, the lesson was clear. Loudness doesn't equal power. Noise doesn't equal authority. True respect manifests quietly with every measured movement, every controlled breath, and every decision made with clarity. And that quiet authority leaves a lasting impression, far stronger than any shout ever could. After the room had emptied and the immediate tension faded, the lesson lingered in the air. It wasn't about who was louder, who swung harder, or who tried to dominate the scene. It was about something far subtler and far more powerful. Control. The challenger had walked in full of confidence, strutting and performing, believing that presence was defined by volume and bravado. But by the end he understood that real authority doesn't need validation from an audience. It doesn't need applause, cheers, or fear. Control, precision, and calm presence do all the talking, silently, undeniably. Observers, too, took note. They had expected chaos. They had expected a spectacle of aggression. Instead, they witnessed efficiency and mastery. Every subtle adjustment, every small redirection of movement, every pause that let the challenger overextend himself, all of it created a lesson that no loud gesture could replicate. Steven's presence taught something deeper. Strength is measured not in noise but in outcomes. The ability to stay composed under pressure, to respond instead of react, and to maintain control while others flail, that is true power. The challenger's regret was instant because he had underestimated the quiet force of competence. Even after the circle had dispersed, the atmosphere remained altered. Those who were present could sense it, the kind of respect that doesn't need to be demanded. It wasn't about intimidation. It wasn't about proving who was bigger or faster. It was about demonstrating skill with calmness, precision, and minimal effort. That combination left a permanent mark. There's a natural temptation in high-pressure situations to assert dominance through force or loudness. Ego pushes people to make bold moves, to speak first, to act without thinking. But the real takeaway is the opposite. Restraint, awareness, and strategic control carry far more weight than aggression or performance. The challenger had learned it the hard way. The observers left quietly, reflecting on what they had seen. The lesson wasn't in humiliation. It wasn't in a single exchange or in the fleeting rush of adrenaline. The lesson was in mastery. How subtle, deliberate choices shift outcomes completely. Those who had expected spectacle left with understanding. Those who had cheered for aggression left with a reminder that skill never needs an audience to prove itself. And for the challenger, the impact was lasting. He had overestimated his own presence and underestimated the subtlety of experience. He had assumed confidence was enough, not realizing that true authority is quiet, controlled, and deliberate. Steven's calm exit from the space reinforced it all. No theatrics, no extra gestures, no words to further assert dominance. Simply control, simply mastery, simply presence that spoke for itself. That single reality created reflection, not fear, and left the challenger with a choice. Ignore the lesson or internalize it. The real takeaway is clear. Situations don't always reward volume. They reward poise. They reward clarity. They reward control over reaction, not over others. And anyone who tries to assert dominance without understanding that will discover their limits instantly. What matters more in a situation like that? Proving a point or keeping control?